Hello there, you're watching a special edition of World 360 here on CNN News 18. I'm Maha Siddiqui. There's turmoil in the region with the US troops withdrawing from Afghanistan. India is worried and Pakistan is being accused of emboldening the Taliban. Amidst all this, what is the future of Afghanistan and the region? Joining us on the show today, CNN's Fareed Zakaria for his perspective on this critical issue. Many thanks, Fareed. First of all, Fareed, what explains Taliban with 1/4 the strength of the Afghan forces taking over the country so rapidly?
Well, first, to be clear, there is a slight exaggeration or perhaps a substantial exaggeration in terms of what they have been able to achieve. Okay. People talk about the Taliban controlling 60% of Afghanistan, 70% of Afghanistan. They claim to control 85% of Afghanistan. First of all, these numbers are not entirely correct. But more importantly, Afghanistan's population is largely concentrated in its cities. And the Taliban controls large parts of the countryside. So if you were to ask what percentage of the population of Afghanistan does the Taliban control, it's a much smaller number. Okay. The Taliban does not control Kabul. It has tried to take Kandahar, the second largest city, still not successful. I don't want to diminish the reach of the Taliban, but I think I want to put it in some perspective. They do not control the major population centers of the country. But the fundamental explanation to your question, Maha, is the Taliban remains a very powerful, lethal fighting force that has been fighting for the last 20 years. The people who have been in government, the Afghan National Army, things like places like that, have simply not been as battle-hardened as these Taliban warriors. And so there's a military point and then there's a political point. The Taliban do represent some part of a disgruntled Pashtun population of Afghanistan that does not recognize the government of Afghanistan as legitimate, views this as the remnants of the old Northern Alliance, and so is fighting very hard. So those two features, military effectiveness and a real political cause, have combined to produce a situation where you can't really defeat the Taliban, and the Taliban is doing pretty well on the battlefield.
Fareed, you spoke about the urban areas. Now, rockets landed at the presidential palace in Kabul as Eid prayers were being offered. Now, though Taliban denied responsibility, however, this does show how precarious really the security situation is. Is the US not concerned about the situation where Ghani himself could be overthrown? Is that a possibility?
Everything is possible. The situation is very fluid. And of course, there is great concern. But Maha, put it in perspective. The United States has been in Afghanistan now for 20 years. It has spent close to $2 trillion. It has trained the Afghan National Army, the police force. It has paid for the entire defense budget, effectively really the entire GDP of Afghanistan. I mean, Afghanistan's defense budget is larger than its GDP. For 20 years. And so at some point you have to ask, is the government of Afghanistan, is the state capable of standing up by itself, holding on to power? And if it's not, how long can you have an outside force that is essentially an alien force occupying and stabilizing this government? So there is great concern. But it's not clear what the solution is. I mean, the solution cannot be an unending American occupation of Afghanistan. So there is a hope that with air power, with intelligence, with financial support, this Afghan government can hold together.
Fareed, President Biden said that the objective of going into Afghanistan was, and I'm quoting him here, to degrade the terrorist threat to keep Afghanistan from becoming a base from which attacks could be continued against the United States. We achieved those objectives, unquote. This is what President Biden said. How have those objectives been achieved, Fareed? A UN report this year said that Taliban's links with Al-QAEDA remain, the same terror outfit that carried out 9/11.
So having links with Al-Qaeda is not the same as housing, sheltering Al-Qaeda while it is perpetrating attacks around the world. Okay. Al-Qaeda is a shell of itself. It has been battered, bruised. It's scattered remnants. Some of them are in Mali. Some of them are still in Pakistan. So I think it's fair to say that Al-Qaeda has been very substantially degraded. ISIS has been very substantially degraded. And the Taliban itself, as you know, has not really ever been a global terrorist organization. There are no global terrorist attacks that I know of that were planned and executed by the Taliban. So, yes, if you're asking, are there some links, some ties? Of course, these are old Confederates. These guys fought together, but I don't think it would be fair to say that Al-Qaeda is operating under in the shadow and in the protective orbit of the Taliban anymore. And by the way, if they were to do that, there are ways to degrade that capability even now. Okay. So I think it's fair to say what Biden did, which is that the Taliban, to the extent that the issue was global terrorism coming out of Afghanistan, that capacity has been substantially degraded.
But Fareed, the fact also is that there is instability in the region currently, and America is simply packing up and leaving.
Maha, there's instability in Myanmar. There's instability in Haiti. There's instability in Ethiopia. There's instability in the Congo. There's instability in Venezuela. There's instability in Cuba. Surely that the answer is not that the United States should be militarily intervening in all these places all over the world. The United States, as I said, has tried to stabilize Afghanistan for 20 years at the cost of $2 trillion. Thousands of Americans have died in trying to do that. But at some point, the country has to be able to stabilize itself.
But Fareed, then would you say America's longest war ended in defeat if the Taliban take over Afghanistan and the Afghan government falls?
Yes, I would. I think that there's no getting around the reality that this war has not gone as the United States had hoped. Part of the reason may be, as I say, that the Taliban represented a very significant part of the Pashtun population of Afghanistan. And perhaps they should have been brought into a power sharing agreement earlier on. That it was a mistake to try to govern Afghanistan by entirely excluding this group that does represent some part of the Pashtun population, which, as you know, is the dominant, most powerful population ethnically within Afghanistan. The second part of this, which one cannot avoid talking about, is, to my knowledge, there is no civil war that has ever been won when the guerrilla force has a safe haven in a neighboring country. And the Taliban has a safe haven in Pakistan. Not just a safe haven, they have a safe haven which has been created by the Pakistani military and the ISI. They have been funded by the Pakistani military and the ISI. They have been sustained by the Pakistani military and the ISI. In that circumstance, it is very difficult to win because the Taliban could always cross the border into the safety and security of their safe zones and safe havens in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Now, given that reality, it was probably impossible to completely destroy the Taliban because they would never stay in Afghanistan. They'd move to Pakistan, and the United States very, very rarely crossed the Pakistani border. The most famous case in which they did so, of course, was to capture and kill Osama bin Laden, who was living not just in Pakistan, but in a Pakistani, what was essentially a Pakistani military compound.
So Fareed, in that scenario, what is the expectation of the US from Pakistan? As you yourself say, they are providing a safe haven to Taliban. What message has been sent out to Pakistan by America?
Look, the United States has been sending Pakistan the message for 20 years now that it has to stop supporting the Taliban, stop providing aid, stop providing assistance. You will remember very public declarations from everybody going back to President Bush, Colin Powell in those days, President Musharraf would give guarantees that that Osama bin Laden and Mullah Omar were not in Pakistan, all of which turned out to be false, by the way. The Quetta Shura, the governing body of the Taliban, was in fact in Pakistan. Osama bin Laden was in fact in Pakistan. So the Pakistanis have been playing a double game and being fairly deceptive about this from the start. But here's the reality. The United States does not have that much influence with Pakistan. Its relations have frayed substantially. Pakistan believes that the United States is now in a de facto alliance with India, and Pakistan itself is moving into a de facto alliance with China.
Yes.
So the geopolitics of the region have changed substantially since 2001, when Pakistan was somewhat deferential to the United States as it decided it was going to invade Afghanistan. Today, Pakistan has clearly made the decision to align itself with China. The United States has a very close military and political association with India. And so the real question becomes, what does India want to do in this new situation in which it finds itself with an unstable Afghanistan, a Pakistan that is now clearly aligned with China, and a United States that is offering a hand of friendship.
So, Fareed, are you suggesting that India will continue to get closer to America due to its own insecurities in the region and largely China?
I think that India is getting closer to the United States for a variety of reasons. Part of them are economic and societal. The countries are both democracies, both have a similar economic orientation, closer and closer business ties, closer and closer societal ties. But the fundamental strategic reason is, of course, the rise of China. But the challenge India needs to face up to is, what does it want to do with regard to an unstable Afghanistan? For a long time now, India has looked at the United States as, as the savior. That U.S. intervention in Afghanistan will save India from having to deal with the unpleasant reality of having a foreign policy toward Afghanistan. The United States will secure the non-Taliban government. The United States would fight the Taliban. The United States would pressure Pakistan, which is all well and good. The United States did that. But those are Indian interests and objectives as well. And as the United States is leaving, India needs to ask itself, can it have a more forward-leaning policy in Afghanistan? Okay. What should it be doing? It has tacitly, quietly, and in a de facto manner relied on the United States to do India's dirty work in Afghanistan. India will have to step up. It is a regional power. It needs to have its interests and its objectives in Afghanistan achieved. And I think that means it also needs to get involved in this same struggle. They're on the same side. India wants the Ashraf Ghani government to hold. It wants the Kabul government to be stabilized. Well, then it can't expect, the great power from 6,000 miles away to do all the work. It should also get involved.
But Fareed, India says it has been involved in Afghanistan over the last 2 decades. India's conducted development work across 34 provinces of Afghanistan. What more is the expectation when India has clearly ruled out boots on the ground in Afghanistan?
Well, and then India has to be comfortable with whatever the military consequences of that decision are. In other words, India cannot say we desperately want the Ashraf Ghani government to hold, for the Kabul government to stand, for this, Afghanistan's democratic experiment to succeed, but we won't do anything about it. What we'll do is send a few $1 million of developmental aid. That's not going to save the Ashraf Ghani government. You yourself were talking about the dire circumstance, the strength of the Taliban. So India has to ask itself, does it really care about the objectives it has outlined, the stability of the Ashraf Ghani government, the ability to beat back the Taliban? And if it does, is it willing to provide assistance? It's up to India to decide what form that assistance takes. But if it will not provide that assistance, as I say, for 20 years, America has done that work for it. At this point, if India is not willing to get involved, it will have to live with the consequences of that abdication.
All right, strong words there coming from you, Fareed. We're taking a very quick break. When we come back, we'll talk more about life under Taliban and what it means for the women. Welcome back. CNN's Fareed Zakaria still with us for his perspective on Afghanistan. Fareed, the next question then is that what should the world do when it sees the re-emergence of horrifying living conditions for women making a comeback with the Taliban, and more so for women in media? Surely the international community can't be mute spectators, and surely not America. How do you see the US reacting to the situation of the democratic gains of the last 20 years being squandered away within days?
So those democratic gains only happened, Maha, because of the United States. It is American blood, toil, and treasure that produced 20 years of democratic gains in Afghanistan. And at some point, as I say, the United States has to see if the country can support those gains by itself. But if India is part of the international community, India should speak up, India should act up, India should do more than it is doing right now. As I say, India is a regional power. It just does not behave like one. And if one is worried about the rights of women, the rights of minorities, the rights of children, well, I mean, frankly, it's also happening in Myanmar. You have, essentially a kind of ethnic cleansing on a scale that is going on almost nowhere else in the world right now in Myanmar, where the Rohingya are being persecuted and driven out of their homes. There is the prospect of that happening in Afghanistan. India is a proud and leading member of the international community. India should do more itself. America has done a lot. As I say, 20 years, $2 trillion, thousands of people dead. That's not a small price that it has paid for Afghan freedom.
Okay. Fareed, I'll once again quote President Biden. He said, our military commanders advised that once I made the decision to end the war, we need to move swiftly to conduct the main elements of the drawdown. And in this context, speed is safety, unquote. Speed may have been safety, Fareed, for the US forces, but it spelled doom for Afghanistan. The Afghan ambassador to India, while speaking with CNN News 18, blamed the US for the unfashioned drawdown, leading to chaos and letting Taliban take over. Would you say his assessment is correct? Could this have been better executed at least?
I'm not a military person, but what I would tell you is the really significant factor here is not the speed of the American drawdown. It is this fact. For the last 2 years, we've been living in an illusion, in an illusory world in which just 3,500 American troops and 8,000 coalition troops seem to be holding Afghanistan together. The truth of the matter is they were holding Afghanistan together because the Taliban had stopped attacking foreign forces. Ever since the Trump administration began negotiating with the Taliban had stopped attacking foreign forces. If those talks had fallen through, if the United States had made clear that it was not intending to broker some kind of deal, those attacks would have begun again. The situation only appeared to be stable because the Taliban was not attacking foreign forces for the last 2 years. So I think we were living in a kind of fool's paradise. The reality is, if you need foreign forces to support Afghanistan and to keep its government alive, you probably need many more than that. At this point, at the levels U.S. troops were at for the last few months, they were not doing anything. They were engaging in force protection. They had retreated to their strongholds, to their army bases, and they were not doing very much. The Taliban was, as a shrewd and strategic matter, not attacking them because they were negotiating with them in Doha. All that would have changed, and I don't think the speed of the American withdrawal has that much to do with it.
But, Fareed, calls were made by Afghanistan's international partners to give up weapons, especially ahead of Eid, and to come to the negotiating table for peace talks. If Taliban continues to capture territory as they are currently doing, do you believe any such calls will be taken seriously by them if they can capture power by force?
Diplomacy only works when it is backed with power. The Afghan government has to show that its army can win some of these battles. There are some places, by the way, where Taliban gains have been reversed, and the Afghan army and the police force have to show that they can hold together their country, at least the major population centers. The talks will have meaning if the Taliban believe that there is power behind those talks.
Okay.
And that is ultimately what we are going to watch, whether or not the Afghan government, after 20 years, after getting hundreds of billions of dollars of aid, hundreds of billions of dollars of equipment, can hold itself together.
We'll leave it at that, Fareed. Many thanks for making time for this insightful conversation on Afghanistan. That's it today on World 360. See you again next week. Bye-bye.